Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's kind of hard to even put it in context easily because it's not something that is talked about a lot. We talk about it a fair amount on this show, but so last week we talked about how the OAS, right, the organization, what is the actual acronym? The OAS is essentially the UN for the Americas, right? The Organization of American States. That's what it is. They recognized Tare, which is Juan Guaido's appointee to the body. Remember, Juan Guaido is not the elected president. He's the opposition leader, shadow government. And so by the OAS recognizing Tare, that's the first real tangible foothold that this shadow opposition government has recognized in this international way. It came out in April. There was a meeting on April 13th that the Gray Zone exposed. It was a private roundtable that gathered a who's who of Trump advisors, right-wing Latin American officials, and Venezuelan opposition figures to discuss assessing the use of military force in Venezuela. The meeting was hosted on April 10th at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, a Washington-based think tank where Tare has been employed as a fellow, and the newly installed ambassador's name appeared on the meeting check-in list. So he was at this meeting literally discussing using foreign military options to invade his own country. How is this not a coup?
Seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, that's really reasonable.
He's just asking for help. I mean, come on.
I mean, doesn't every sovereign country want to get foreign troops from their soil as soon as possible, whenever they can?
Especially during an election or after an election.
So he held a press conference because now being recognized by the OAS, he's got his first real legitimacy, and he was getting a lot of softball questions, a lot of very favorable, sort of sycophantic, what? Tell us what you're going to do, kind of folks. But there was one person who was like, I'm aware of this meeting that we weren't supposed to know about, and basically asked, why are you advocating for bringing foreign military into your country? And he countered that, oh, well, there's already foreign military there and we've got to fight them. There are Russians and there are Cubans that are there. And this reporter mentioned those Russian and Cuban military members are engineers that are there to help with infrastructure at the request of the internationally recognized government. Like, they're not invading, they're there to support, and they were invited. That's totally legitimate. And he just got rattled. He goes, no, any government that will help is invited. When the Soviet Union was invaded by Hitler, help from the Allies was fundamental. If not, there would be a defeat at the beginning. The same with us. And it's like, what are you talking? That's just not how World War II went at all, dude. Like, what? He ends up conceding that the Venezuela's opposition is entirely 100% contingent on the backing of the United States military. They need the United States military in order to carry out this coup. And basically he says, this reporter asks Tare, what, other than this OAS seat, what legitimacy, what support do you have within the country? What parts of the government does the Guaido administration actually have any control over? And Tare's response was, the streets. And he sort of derisively calls her Nina, like, little girl, like, you don't know what you're talking about. The streets, everyone loves us. And she's like, no, I was in Venezuela, I was in Caracas in February, and I did witness massive demonstrations, but they were massive demonstrations in favor of the Maduro government. So I don't know what you're talking about when you say the streets. And he, again, very dismissively mocked handing his glasses to her, like, you're blind, you can't even see. Your firsthand account doesn't really matter. It's true. And she asks, well, when was the last time you were in Venezuela? His answer, 5 years ago.
5 years ago. So this is the problem that we have with this story. First, you could tell that he's trying to get favor from a lot of Western powers, most notably the United States and the big oil companies, because Venezuela is sitting upon a lot of oil, more than Saudi Arabia. And we all know one thing: the fossil fuel industry and the military industrial complex are foaming at the mouth hoping to have a government that's more friendly to them and their policies. Remember what happened in Iran when their national democratically elected government was replaced with the Shah. There was a coup, and now this is the same thing that's happening in Venezuela. It's almost a repeat, only except a different environment, different political situation altogether, but it's still, nonetheless, it's the same story. You have the top 1%, the establishment, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex here in the United States wanting to intervene in a sovereign nation, intervening with their local government and their policies, trying to create something that's going to favor them. Is this something that the American taxpayer really wants on their conscience? Because guess who's going to be funding it? It's going to be us. We're the ones that are going to be dealing with the aftermath. We're going to be ones dealing with the international consequences. And think about the next president that's going to inherit this disaster. We have to all step up and recognize that, look, are there problems in Venezuela? Absolutely. Does it require American involvement? No. The people who are going to have to solve the crisis in Venezuela are the people of Venezuela themselves. They're going to have to solve it. Just like how we solve our own problems here in the United States. We solve our problems. We wouldn't like it if some foreign country did that to us. And before anyone else mentions, oh, Russiagate, Russiagate, Russiagate. No, I'm talking about what the United States is doing. We are interfering with a sovereign nation. And here we have our puppets basically saying that, a reporter doesn't even see what's going on. You have people protesting against the illegitimate government that's somehow recognized by the rest of the world. Daniel.
So I find it always very fascinating how the U.S., out of one side of their mouth, can say, hey, Russia is attacking us, this is a foreign nation hurting our sovereignty, while simultaneously at the exact same moment we are trying to start a coup against an ally of Russia. And I gotta say, for all the people that are worried about refugees and think that there are too many coming to the border, you haven't seen anything yet. What happens when you have these civil wars that destroy the infrastructure, the command and control, the government of a country? It takes a long time to build a government up to a democracy. You can't just rebuild one into it. And we know Trump's already spilled the beans on it, that this is an attempt to get their oil because I guess Saudi Arabia is running low and they're not giving us the right price on that commodity. So all of a sudden they have all these human rights violations. And like Paul said, they're literally trying to shadow install a government that hasn't been elected, that is allied with the US, which is trying to get the situation together to do a coup. Now, I think that the only kind of sort of saving grace, maybe not saving grace because it isn't definitely a saving grace, is that the US recently has destroyed its reputation worldwide for doing so many of these coups, a carbon copy of what is being planned here, that I'm not so sure that they're not going to be able to just run in like they have with a bunch of other countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, etc., that there just isn't the political will to just march in. So they're trying to orchestrate a situation where they can either get the Venezuelans to react in a way that they can claim that now we need to send the military in because of XYZ. And they've been trying to do that, for example, with that whole bridge crossing that everyone was like, oh, the U.S. government said that the military was shooting at relief convoys. And then we later learned that, no, it was one of the people protesting on the other side of the bridge that lit that truck on fire.
It was one of the opposition.
The opposition, yeah.
And that truck got on fire very fast. It seemed like they had munitions or supplies, flammable supplies.
But the point that we're trying to get at with this is that the U.S. has to do this in a way, with a carefulness, and this is why I say it's partially saving grace, that they haven't in previous conflicts. So at least here, there's an opportunity more than almost any other place in the last few decades where Venezuela may be able to avert this or delay it long enough for another president to be in charge of the situation.
Make no mistake, they have been doing that. They have been delaying and successfully averting coup attempts since the early 2000s.
Yeah, right. So there's a couple of things I want to mention. In the chat, Karamas states this: remember, only 50 of about 197 countries in the world support this coup. The United States is being one of them, and we should all be ashamed of ourselves.
There's a great journalist asking that question at the UN or at the State Department.
Yeah. So again, what we have to remember is that this is a sovereign country, and these are people that right now, especially people of Venezuela, it's a very tense situation for them, and here's hoping that cooler minds prevail and that we don't interfere with this country. We don't invade. We don't put in U.S. ground forces, because if we do, like Daniel said, there will be a mass exodus of people leaving Venezuela. And think about it. I don't know if it's going to be similar to like how it was in Iraq and Afghanistan, because this is in our own backyard. This is in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm pretty sure the neighboring nations around Venezuela don't want to have that humanitarian crisis.
It's a lot
either.
Closer to home.
Yeah, it'll impact us more. And not to mention, I think a lot of people, especially voters, will be looking at the Trump administration and also reactions from the Democrats that are running this race. What are their thoughts on U.S. forces bombing a Western nation? Yeah. Paul, you want to add a final note?
Yeah, a final note on this. Another thing I've been following, keeping an eye on, Code Pink and other activists are sort of actively hanging around the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., for fear that at any moment, and people were noticing this, actually there may be updates, I need to double check this, but there were a lot of Secret Service and police circling around. There's worry that the actual Venezuelan ambassadors and diplomats will be expelled from the Venezuelan embassy and the shadow government's ambassadors installed in the United States. So there are a lot of activists actively hanging out at the Venezuelan embassy to sort of document and deter any potential action that the U.S. government takes in favor of this non-government government.
All right. So that's a crisis that's happening, and we're going to be following through with it, because I think it's important that we really talk about the story and keep it alive. But now we got to move.
Very
Go ahead.
Aren't you guys glad that the news media is talking about nothing but Russiagate all this time?
Yeah. 2.5 years on Russiagate, all the while ignoring the rest of the issues impacting the free world.
Yeah.
Thank you, corporate media.